The house glowed in soft amber tones, twinkling with lights wrapped around every banister and window pane. From the outside, it looked like a Christmas card, something pulled straight from a magazine. Inside, the warmth of cinnamon and clove hung in the air, the sound of laughter bouncing between rooms. My father was carving ham in the kitchen, my mother humming something off-tune while arranging napkins. My nieces squealed over candy canes and matching pajamas. Everything looked perfect. I stood by the stairwell, watching the swirl of motion. I had spent 3 days hand-picking gifts, wrapping them with navy and gold paper, curling every ribbon. A part of me, the part that still believed, hoped this year might feel different, that I'd be seen. They say Christmas is for everyone. I believed them until tonight. The gift exchange began like a ritual. Mum handed out packages with a performative grin. Dad poured eggnog like he was hosting a talk show. Everyone clapped and laughed. As each person unwrapped something they'd clearly wanted, perfume, monogrammed jackets, vinyl records, I clapped too, quietly. Holding my cup of cider tighter, I waited for my turn, a smile already on my lips, soft and ready. I wasn't asking for much, just a moment, a flicker of thought. Then someone, I think it was Aunt Cheryl, shoved a small plastic object into my hands. No box, no paper, just a brush, a cleaning brush, the kind you'd use on grout or dishes. No one said anything, no jokes, no explanations. They all just moved on. And then it hit me, that was it, that was my gift. A brush, no words, no warmth, just a message. I kept the smile, like a reflex. My hand sat motionless on my lap. Everyone else kept chatting, tearing through balls and tissue. I said nothing. In the quiet corners of my mind, I started rewinding the tape. Last Christmas, my card left unopened until February. 2 birthdays ago, forgotten entirely. I used to chalk it up to chaos, to life being messy, but now, maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe I've been blind. My fingers found the tiny necklace I always wore, the one Grandma June gave me when I turned 14. A single letter engraved. M. She had whispered to me then, "You're worth more than they say." I'd never needed those words more than I did in that moment. I got up, slow, so no one would notice. No one did. Outside, the cold greeted me like an old friend. Snow had begun to fall, covering the deck chairs and garden gnomes in white dust. I sat on the edge of the wooden step, the brush still in my hand. How many times had I played the peacekeeper? Held my tongue, covered their messes, cooked when Mum was too tired? Listened to my sister sob over a boyfriend who treated her like dirt? If I disappeared tomorrow, would they even notice? The backyard was silent, lit only by the soft pulse of Christmas lights. Red, green, white, blinking against the dark. My breath fogged in the air. I didn't cry. That felt like giving them something they didn't deserve. I walked back in slowly, a little colder inside than out. As I passed the hallway, I heard it, half whispered but sharp enough to slice. "She's always so sensitive, that's why no one gets her anything real." I stopped. My spine didn't flinch, but something deep in me did. I turned slightly and caught Rachel's eyes, my sister-in-law. She looked at me, then quickly away, like I'd walked in on something ugly, which I guess I had. I don't know what hurt more, the gift or the look in her eyes when I saw she meant it. I stepped back into the dining room like nothing had cracked inside me, but the air felt different now, sharper. My hands were still cold from the snow outside, and I pressed one against my dress just to feel something warm. The laughter around the table hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown louder. Plates clinked. Someone passed the sweet potatoes. Dad was telling a story I'd heard a dozen times. No one looked up. Mum's eyes finally found mine. She didn't smile, didn't say a word, just flicked her hand toward the far end of the table. I followed her gesture, and there it was. My seat, the only one left. It wasn't at the table, not really. It hovered on the edge, close enough to hear, too far to belong, and it sat right next to the trash bin, its lid half open, the scent of discarded ham fat, barely covered by a lemon-scented bag. No placemat, no folded napkin. It's just a seat, I told myself, just a chair. But I knew better. I pulled it out gently, the legs scraping the tile, and sat down without a sound, the brush from earlier still pressed against the inside of my coat pocket. The conversations rolled on as if I'd never left the room. Cass was showing pictures on her phone, boasting about her daughter's piano recital at Lincoln Center. "She didn't miss a note," she said proudly, and the chorus of praise echoed around the table. "You're incredible, Cass," someone said. "Everything you touch turns perfect." They nodded like it was gospel. I looked down at my plate, chicken breast, a scoop of potatoes, no gravy. No one had asked what I'd like. My fork sat alone, no napkin to its side. My glass, half filled with water, had lipstick on the rim, but not mine. I didn't speak, just watched. I was used to it. Their words floated like bubbles just out of reach. Talks about promotions, vacation homes, golf memberships. I might as well have been wallpaper. My name was never spoken. At some point, Cass reached for more bread, brushing my shoulder. She didn't look at me. Something twisted inside me, and my mind wandered, not away, but back. I saw flashes of other dinners. Thanksgiving, my seat by the hallway, cold every time someone opened the door. Easter brunch, me seated near the caterer's table, juggling empty champagne flutes that weren't mine. Mother's Day, stuck between the kitchen counter and a stack of folded chairs. It had always been like this. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. A quote came to me. Mr. Linden, my old art teacher, once told me, "If they can make you feel small, they never have to feel guilty." And just like that, the sting deepened, because I used to think I belonged. I tried to enter the conversation. I leaned toward Cass and asked gently, "How's the Johnson project going? Still working with that New York firm?" She paused, just long enough to sting, then turned to speak to someone else instead. No reply, just dismissal. A ripple of laughter followed something I hadn't heard. Then my mother chimed in, cheerful but sharp. "She doesn't really follow business stuff, dear. Don't worry." My throat burned, but I swallowed it. I smiled and nodded, the way people do when they're trying not to scream. Silence wasn't something I chose. It was something they gave me. Then came the whisper, low but clear enough to reach. "She's always been sensitive," Rachel said, leaning toward Aunt Fran. "Be careful what you say around her," she added as if I were a child in a room full of glass. "She takes everything too personally," Mum replied with a sigh, not even looking my way. They didn't see the hurt. They saw fragility. Like I was made of paper, breakable, irrational, a problem. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. I didn't stand. I didn't speak. But something inside me shifted, quiet and hard. It's not sensitivity, I thought. It's memory, and I remember everything. The crumbs on my plate, the silence that stretched around me like a fence, the way Rachel laughed just a little too loud at a joke she didn't find funny. I picked up my plate, barely touched, and stood. No one noticed, no one paused. In the kitchen, I placed the dish in the sink, rinsed it slowly, and stared at my reflection in the dark window above. They won't hear me coming, but they will remember I was here. I stayed in the kitchen longer than I needed to, hands moving through warm water as if I had been asked to clean. Not that anyone ever did. I washed each plate slowly, as if I could scrub away the tightness in my chest. The scent of pine dish soap lingered, the same scent my mother had used for decades. It pulled at something old, something buried. The laughter from the dining room felt muffled now, like it belonged to another house, another world. I wasn't angry, not yet. Just tired in a way that clung to my bones. Maybe I was always doing the cleanup, I thought, even for messes I didn't make. I stacked a dish on the rack and paused, eyes drawn to a chipped serving bowl on the counter. Cream-coloured, hand-painted roses, my mother's favourite. She never threw it out. I used to love it. Tonight it made my stomach tighten. That bowl had been at every holiday we ever had. I remembered being small enough to stare at it over the edge of the table, tracing the roses with my eyes while everyone else talked around me. I closed my eyes, and the memory came back. I was 9. It was Christmas morning. I had unwrapped a doll, red hair, blue dress. She looked like the friend I had wished for. I carried her everywhere that morning, sat her beside me at breakfast. Cass cried because hers wasn't as pretty. She pouted loud enough that our mother laid a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're the older one, be understanding." She took the doll gently, but she still took it and placed it in Cass's hands. Everyone praised my kindness. I smiled until my jaw hurt. That night, I sat in my room holding the empty box, whispering, "It was mine first." I never forgot that doll. I only pretended I did. I wiped my hands on a towel, breath catching as something else surfaced, another echo, harsher. I was 11 when $20 went missing from Mum's purse. She didn't ask who took it. She looked right at me. "You've been spending time with Bellamy's boy. Don't think I don't notice." Cass swore she hadn't touched it, and Mum called her honest. Dad said nothing, just sighed, disappointed. They never found the money. They never apologized. It wasn't the accusation that stayed with me. It was how easily they believed I could be at fault. Back in the present, I gripped the counter. The tile floor felt unsteady, though nothing moved. These memories hadn't been lost. I had buried them deep, thinking that must be what healing meant, forgetting, but forgetting wasn't healing. It was erasing myself. "They've made me the villain," I whispered. "In stories they never let me tell." A line I once heard floated up. "Families don't always erase you. Sometimes they rewrite you." I thought of how many times I'd been quiet, how often I'd agreed with things that weren't true, just to keep peace. My silence had become their evidence, their proof that I was everything they claimed, sensitive, distant, strange. I opened a drawer, searching for a cloth. Instead, I found it, a journal. Black cover, faded edges, I hadn't seen it in years. I opened it cautiously. The pages smelled like dust and ink. Most entries were teenage ramblings, sketches, song lyrics, scribbled dreams. Then I found it. A page dated December 25th. The year I was 9. I read my own handwriting. They took my gift. They said I was understanding. I smiled, but I remember I won't let them forget this time. My throat tightened. My younger self had known. She had seen it all. The girl who wrote that, she hadn't disappeared. She was waiting. I didn't go back to the table after the kitchen. I didn't want to sit near the trash can again. Didn't want to feel the weight of pretending I was fine. So I lingered in the hallway, just outside the glow of the living room where the others laughed. I stood there, half hidden, arms crossed. Cass was holding court in the centre as usual, telling some story that had them all leaning in. They nodded and smiled and hung on her every word. Not one person looked my way. I watched for a moment, then turned. There was a side room off the hallway, Dad's old office, now mostly storage. I stepped in, shut the door behind me, and stood still. The walls were lined with dusty books and an unplugged lamp. No sound, just my heart beating fast and loud in my chest. I whispered to myself, I don't need to be seen tonight. And I believed it, almost. Outside the room, the voices carried on. Cass's voice rose above them. You know, in this family, attention isn't a given, you earn it. My mother's voice followed, warm and firm. Exactly right. Then, quieter. Cass again. She just can't take a joke. Poor Mara. I didn't move. My face flushed hot. The sting wasn't just the words, it was the smirk I knew Cass had when she said them, the knowing look they probably exchanged, as if they were talking about someone helpless. My chest tightened. I used to cry over things like that. Now I just stood there, jaw clenched, fists balled. That wasn't a joke. That was a knife dressed in laughter. A small mirror hung on the wall near the bookshelf. I caught my reflection by accident. Red eyes, tight mouth, shoulders drawn up. I looked like someone I didn't recognize, someone who'd spent years shrinking herself so the people around her wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I remembered a teacher in high school who once asked me, "Why don't you speak up more in class?" I didn't have an answer back then, but now I did. Because when I did, they acted like I was a problem. I ran my hand through my hair and stared hard at the mirror. Then I walked out. Cass was in the middle of telling someone how proud she was of her youngest for speaking up at school. "She's got such a strong voice," she said, "takes after me." I didn't say it loud, but it cut through the air like glass. You don't get to diminish my struggles just because they're quieter. The room fell silent. Cass turned, her face froze, smile halfway off. My mother blinked once, then said nothing. No one said anything. I didn't wait for permission, didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. I just let it hang there, like smoke that wouldn't clear. It was the first time in years I didn't ask for space. I took it. Then I walked away. Upstairs, I stepped into my old bedroom, closed the door and leaned against it. Cass's voice drifted up the stairs. "To family, long may we stay united." I locked the door. Quiet. Firm, and I thought, united under her version, not mine, not anymore. I sat at the edge of my childhood bed, legs tucked under me like I used to when I was a girl. The wallpaper, faded lilac flowers I chose when I was 13, seemed to press inward, as if the walls had shrunk over the years. The trophies on the dresser, dusty and forgotten, stood like relics of someone else's life. I opened my old journal again, flipping through pages crowded with words I once believed no one would ever read. Entries full of promises to be better, quieter, easier to love, promises no one asked me to make. What was the point of being the quiet one, I whispered, if no one ever listened? I rested the journal on my lap and stared around the room. Nothing had changed. Everyone always said I was steady, consistent, dependable. They never saw how that room was both sanctuary and cell, a place to retreat and a place to disappear. It felt smaller now because I no longer fit the version of myself they'd built. A memory pulled me backward. I was 19, home from college, with a Dean's List certificate tucked in my bag. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, waiting for a moment to show someone, anyone, but Cass had just broken up with her boyfriend, and everyone was rallying around her, handing tissues, offering advice. No one looked at me. I stood there until the paper grew warm in my hands. Then I folded it and slipped it into the drawer beside the microwave. I don't think anyone ever knew. They never asked. Some accomplishments are invisible when they don't fit the family script. Back then, I told myself it didn't matter. Tonight, it felt like proof. Proof that silence is not grace, it's erasure. A floorboard creaked outside my door. Laughter floated up from downstairs, softer now, but still present, like music from another house. I stood, smoothed my dress, and walked out. Not because I wanted to be with them, but because I refused to keep hiding. Downstairs, dessert had just been served. Cherry pie, bread pudding, coffee poured into mismatched holiday mugs. I stepped into the dining room, forks paused, conversations stalled, eyes turned. My mother was the first to speak. "Can we please have one night?" she said mildly, "without someone making everything about them?" Her tone was calm, even sweet, but her words carried a blade. I blinked slowly. "What did I do?" She sighed as if burdened. "You carry tension like a storm cloud. It ruins things." Aunt Fran glanced away. Rachel hid a smile behind her glass. Cass didn't bother to hide hers. I nodded once. "I see." I looked toward my father. He sat at the end of the table, hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Years ago, he called me his quiet compass. Tonight, he didn't meet my eyes. He adjusted his glasses and cut into his pie. He said nothing. That silence split something open inside me. "You don't have to yell," I said softly, "to disappear someone." No one spoke, no apology came. Set my fork down, straightened my back, and made sure my voice was steady. "If you thought my silence was loyalty, you were wrong." I didn't wait for their response. I turned, walked out, and felt every step like a line being drawn. This time, I wasn't walking away to hide. I was walking away to be heard. I locked the study door behind me and pressed my back to it for a moment, steadying my breath. The house felt quiet, eerily so. I laid out my proof on the desk. Old emails, photos with ironic captions. The certificate folded and creased in a folder. The brass lamp cast a harsh light across the pages. Dorian slipped in, eyes wide. He handed me Cass's phone without saying a word. I nodded to him. His small gesture said everything. My fingers trembled, but I wrote. I composed a message to the extended family. The evidence, the truth, the voice they ignored. I stared at the send button. My trigger finger hovered. I thought I should wait, but hesitated too long. I opened Cass's gallery, scrolled to a mocking photo of me, cinched face, awkward tilt. With the caption, "That weird aunt." I snapped a picture. Then I whispered, "This isn't desperation anymore, it's overdue justice." Dorian walked into the room shaky, holding that phone. He showed it to my grandmother first. His voice cracked, but he was clear. "Look, this is how she talks about me and her own sister." Gasps filled the room. Cass yanked the phone back. Her face reddened. The others leaned in, squinting at the screen. Mother tried to dismiss it. "Dorian, that's nothing." I said nothing. Silence taught them what I would no longer say. Then the doorbell rang. Dash stood by the threshold, winter wind still in his hair. He shoved a USB drive at me. I opened it. Inside, Cass's emails plotting to sabotage my job years ago. She asked for something to erase or misplace. She asked someone to take care of my reputation when no one was watching. She charged in. He stood firm. She spat. "You betrayed me." He's calm. "No, I exposed you." The group chat pinged. My email evidence attached went to everyone. The dominoes began falling. Aunts, uncles, cousins, text after text, demanded answers. Cass stuttered through excuses. Mother looked between us, torn. I said with quiet force, "You tried to kill my reputation. Now I'm just giving it the funeral it deserves." Dorian's eyes filled. I felt the shift. The weight of their lies was no longer mine to carry. Cass turned to Mum. "You believed her? Over me?" Mum opened her mouth, then she shut it. Upstairs I heard Dad step. His foot on the floor, a sound so slight it broke the silence. The house was still. Now I see who stood behind me and who stood in front of me. I woke before the sun had stretched its light across the neighborhood, long before anyone else stirred. The house, once dressed in the glow of celebration, sat in a suspended hush, garlands drooping, ribbons sagging, the tree lights blinking on a dying timer. I didn't feel rested, only sharpened. The night's battle had ended, but something in me knew this wasn't over. I sat at the edge of the bed, turning the USB drive in my hand, its weight mocking everything they once believed I wouldn't do. Dorian slipped quietly into the doorway, not a boy anymore, but someone who'd seen truth peel the veneer off adults. He handed me his phone. On the screen played a short clip. Cass's voice slurred from wine, confessing everything to a cousin in the kitchen. She laughed. I had to put her in her place. She'd never fight back anyway. I locked eyes with him. The line had been crossed. I walked downstairs with steady steps, barefoot on the cold wood floors. The kitchen lights flickered on. Someone was preparing breakfast. Pretending nothing had shattered, no one greeted me. Conversations stalled, as if my appearance pulled oxygen from the room. I said nothing. I simply set the USB drive on the coffee table like a sealed verdict. I didn't need theatrics. Silence, when wielded properly, can be a blade. Cass glanced at it, then looked away, refusing to acknowledge the threat coiled inside it. She thought if she ignored me long enough, I would resume my role. She still believed I was the one who would look away first. It happened quickly. A chime from someone's phone, then another. A cousin muttering, "What is this?" The video played aloud, Cass's own voice mocking, planning, justifying her cruelty. Gasps. Someone whispered, "She said that?" Mother pressed her hand to her chest. Cass lunged for the device, but the room had awakened. "You're playing dirty!" She spat at me. I didn't blink. I'm not the one who hid the truth. The words weren't shouted, they were placed, a boundary newly drawn. Cass's lips trembled not with remorse, but anger at losing control of the narrative. Mother began to cry, not the tears of guilt, but the tears of exposure. "How could you do this in front of everyone?" she whispered, clutching her robe. Cass tried to interject, but she couldn't build a lie fast enough. Father stood near the mantel, motionless. I looked at him, waiting as I had all my life for some recognition, some fractured attempt at protection. For once, he met my eyes. "I should have listened earlier," he said, just that. But it split something open in her, not me. The myth of my solitude had been broken. I was no longer standing alone. I picked up the USB and slid it into my pocket. Cass reached toward me, accusation burning in her eyes, but Mother stepped between us. "Enough," she said, not to me, to her. That single word echoed through the room. For years she had chastised my silence. Now she feared my voice. The irony almost made me laugh. The room fell into a quiet I recognized, not peace, but dread. I took one final look at each of them, not pleading, not waiting. I let truth speak, I thought. Now they'll have to answer to it. I turned away, not in retreat, but in release. They weren't ready to hear me, but they would never again claim they didn't know. By the time I came downstairs, the kitchen looked like a movie set, staged, overly lit, and not quite real. Dishes were being passed around, forks clinking too loudly against plates. The smell of cinnamon rolls and bacon weaving through a silence no one dared acknowledge. Cass stood at the coffee pot, pouring 2 cups. She turned, smiling like we hadn't lived through the last 24 hours. "Cream or black?" she asked. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. I didn't answer. I took a seat at the end of the table. The wrong end, apparently, because no one looked at me when they sat down. The walls felt closer than usual. Even the sunlight through the window seemed to wash the room in something harsh. This wasn't breakfast. This was the funeral of the version of us I used to defend. And I was the only one who'd come to bury it honestly. Midway through the meal, after everyone had finished second helpings of the casserole, Cass stood up. She tapped her glass gently like she was giving a toast. I want to say something," she started, glancing around like a student waiting for permission. "I think things got a little out of hand yesterday. I never meant to hurt anyone, especially you, Mara." Her eyes found mine. "Sometimes we act out of childish jealousy. It's not right, but it happens. I'm sorry, truly." Her tone was just soft enough to seem humble, just vague enough to avoid saying anything real. Someone down the table nodded. Another murmured, "That's brave." I took a sip of my coffee. "An apology without accountability," I said, "is just public relations." Her face twitched. The cracks in her performance were showing now. I didn't need to raise my voice. My words landed exactly where they were supposed to, in the space between her and the truth. After breakfast, as people trickled into other rooms, my mother approached me near the hallway. She didn't raise her voice either. She didn't need to. "I think it might be best," she said, "if you head back to the city today." Her eyes stayed on the family photo wall behind me. "It's not about you," she added quickly. "It's just things are tense and we're trying to move past all this, for peace." I looked at her long enough for it to sting. "So I'm the one who threatens peace?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. "Silence is a kind of choice." I leaned in, quiet but firm. "You just made yours." I packed in less than 15 minutes. It was easier than I expected. Most of the things in that room didn't belong to me anymore, hadn't for a long time. A drawer full of journals stayed shut. A bookshelf full of childhood dreams gathered dust untouched. I only pulled out what I'd brought with me. A few clothes, a laptop, and the USB drive. I left behind a photo of me at age 6. Front tooth missing, smile lopsided. The frame hadn't been dusted in years. As I zipped up the suitcase, Dorian knocked once and stepped in. "You don't have to go," he said, his voice quiet but steady. I knelt to meet his eyes. Sometimes, I told him, leaving is the loudest way to stay true to yourself. He didn't understand it yet, not all the way, but one day he might. By the time I wheeled my suitcase to the front door, the house had fallen into that awkward hush again, the kind that follows truth after it's been dragged into daylight. My father stood in the foyer, still in his slippers. He looked older than yesterday, more real. He didn't speak. He just held out a folded sheet of paper. I took it. "Should I read it now?" I asked. He nodded once. I slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't cry. I didn't hug anyone goodbye. I just opened the door and stepped into the cold morning air. I didn't look back. Not until I reached the edge of the sidewalk. And even then, I wasn't looking at the house. I was thinking of that letter. Some truths don't arrive with noise. They arrive when silence finally stops protecting the lie. The letter sat on my lap for an hour before I touched it. I had made tea, opened the blinds, even tidied the corner of my couch like that mattered. But the envelope stayed unopened, like a weight that knew exactly where to press. When I finally unfolded it, the paper shook in my hands, not from nerves, but from the part of me that still hoped, maybe, just maybe, there was something in there worth holding on to. His handwriting was jagged and uneven, dated 2 Christmases ago. He wrote that he'd seen it all, how I was treated, how I swallowed it. He confessed he stayed silent too long, thinking it was noble. "I thought protecting your peace meant staying out of the way." He wrote, "I see now it meant standing beside you." My throat burned. These weren't tears from grief or guilt. They came from recognition of a love that had always been quiet, buried under too much history. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and burnt coffee. My desk still had last week's receipts spread across it, and the bookshelf leaned slightly like it might collapse one day but hadn't yet. Everything here was flawed, lived in, honest. This place didn't demand anything of me. It didn't ask me to smile when I didn't want to. It didn't ask me to shrink so someone else could take up more room. I lit a candle, held the letter like a fragile truth, and let myself feel the full weight of being seen. Finally, fully. Dorian's text popped up. You okay? I didn't hesitate. I think I'm finally getting there, I typed back. I looked around again. I had built this life, brick by painful brick, not flashy, not perfect, but mine. I had left that house thinking I was walking away. Now I realized I had been walking towards something the whole time. For years I'd imagined dramatic apologies. I pictured them tearful, repentant, Cass saying I was wrong, my mother begging, please come home. But those were fantasies built from wounds, not truth. I didn't need them to admit anything anymore. What I needed was air. I took a pen, wrote a note on a torn page from my journal. I won't hold a seat at the table for someone who never saved me a plate. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't even bitter. It was the most honest thing I'd written in a long time. I folded the paper, slipped it between pages of a book I hadn't touched in years, and closed it gently. It wasn't a message I needed to send, just one I needed to let myself say. The sun crept up over the edge of the skyline like it had something gentle to prove. I opened the front door, pulled my jacket close, and stepped out without makeup, without pretense. Just me, a woman who had stopped performing. The streets buzzed with early risers, joggers, delivery vans. I passed the cafe on the corner and the barista smiled before I spoke. Mara, almond latte, right? I nodded. A small thing, but it mattered. I mattered. A man held the door open for me as I stepped back into the cold. You look like you've finally exhaled, he said casually. I laughed. I guess I have. They gave everyone something that Christmas. Wrapped presents, warm toasts, forced smiles. They gave me something too, though they didn't mean to. When they turned cold, when they picked comfort over me, they gave me the freedom to stop waiting. They handed me the gift of walking away without guilt. They never said the words I once longed for, but they did something more permanent. They made peace with the version of me they could understand, and let the rest go. So did I. As the city stretched its limbs and lit its windows, I whispered toward the wind. I gave myself the gift they couldn't. Peace. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to prove I deserved it.